So this is our third video on the principles of economics. And in this video, we're going to concentrate on this third principle, that incentives matter. So incentives are factors that motivate you to act or exert effort. And the principle here is that people respond to them. That is, people respond to incentives. So incentives are all around us. There are positive incentives. For instance, if you work really hard, maybe you get promoted at work. Or if you work really hard at school, maybe there's a financial reward for high grades. There's also negative incentives. For instance, in some places you hear about large fines for people breaking quarantine rules or COVID rules. I've added a couple links in the description with a couple videos or examples of incentives. So one is from The Office and Andy instituting some incentives to get people to work harder. And then another which relates to economic research on providing, monetary rewards for grades and whether that can get students to exert more effort. So we can visually see people responding to incentives by looking at architecture around the world. For instance, in the UK, there's a tax on windows, which results in some buildings replacing their windows with bricks that they don't have to pay this tax. In Vietnam, there's a tax on frontage, on street frontage, which has resulted in these building shapes that are really narrow and tall. This is their way of avoiding that tax. In France, there's a tax on floors, but the roof is exempted. People have responded to this by basically or essentially making their roof another floor. And finally, in Brazil, there's a tax on church construction, but you only have to pay that tax once you're finished that construction. Well, that has meant that these churches in Brazil are under these never-ending construction. So based on our discussion so far, you might think it's relatively straightforward to use incentives to get people to behave like you want them to behave. But it's actually incredibly difficult to kind of predict how people are going to respond to incentives. There's often what we call unintended consequences. What these unintended consequences are kind of unplanned results of incentives. And they're usually negative and unwanted consequences or effects. For instance, one example would be Hanoi under French colonial rule. There's a huge rat infestation problem, and so the French authorities sought to get rid of these rats by providing money for every time someone brought in a rat tail. They thought everyone will start killing rats and we'll get rid of this rat problem in no time. Well, that's not how people responded. People responded by creating rat farms where they could breed rats so they can create as many tails and get as many tails as possible to exchange for money. A similar thing happened in India with cobras. Even economists, even trained economists such as Stephen Levitt of Freakonomics fame has trouble predicting how people are going to respond to incentives. He tried to use incentives to potty train his daughter. It did not go as planned. I've added a video in the description so you can take a look.